Good evening and welcome to the Duval City Council Committee of the Whole. Today is Tuesday, January 5th. It's now 5:31 and we'll call our meeting to order. Our first item tonight is good of the order. Any council members have anything they'd like to share?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, Dot, we can hear you.
Yeah, as I said, I have a little technical difficulty. I think I can sort it out. Yeah, just one thing for the good of the order. When we approved the on-call contracts at the last council meeting, we had received the Exhibit Bs separately. They weren't in the packet. So what I'm hoping is there is a simple way that Jody can get that into the packet information labeled somehow appropriately so that if the public looks at the packet, they can see that those contracts were complete, that the exhibits were there. They just were sent to us, separately. Is there a way that Jody can do that, or do we need to make some kind of separate motion?
I'll have to find out from the attorney if I'm allowed to add stuff to the packet after the fact. I'm not 100% sure if that's something that I'm allowed to do. I can certainly put them on the website if we want to do that as a separate type of thing, if that's what council wants me to do. I just don't know if I can add them to the packet after it's been published. I need to find out.
Well, and I would be fine with, some other method if there's a way to, you have that nice presentations folder, maybe that's a way to do it, or in the minutes for tonight, we reference it, that those were provided, and you have to double check. I mean, it's the last meeting. Let's see, I talked to Steve on the 7th about it originally. So I think it was the meeting on the 15th. That we took that action, if I'm remembering right.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we could just insert that in the minutes and then stick it in the presentation folder for that night. I know this is always awkward because we get information sometimes at the end, right before, because people are so busy, and it's a little awkward to get it on there, in the website. It's happened before. It's not something new. It's just that I think it's important for the public to know that the contract submissions were complete and the council had all the financial documentation when they voted. And that Exhibit B is the fee schedules for those contracts.
I will see what I can do.
Okay.
Councilmember Naplin.
Yeah, I just wanted to share something. I received an email yesterday inviting me to a group. I don't know if this is an ongoing group, but it's the Savor Snoqualmie Valley Outdoor Action Team. And they are having a meeting next week, and their topic is the Duval Park, which is outside of City of Duval, but it's along 203. And Kathy Lambert, our King County Council member, had put in the budget a proviso which required this study to be done. And it's getting moving, and we're pretty excited about it. So my husband also had been advocating for this, and he's been invited to the meeting. And I'm excited to see what will come of it. I think I saw Alana, her name also on the invite list. So it looks like there will be a representative from the city, but really it's about, the Duval Park. It has been pretty significantly underutilized. The baseball field, hasn't been well maintained just due to, site, conditions that are difficult. So it's an exciting opportunity. I believe they will have community involvement where the community can work on, visioning. So I'll learn more and I can share more as I find out more, but I'm just thrilled about that. And so thankful to Councilmember Lambert for her efforts to get that going.
Thank you, Jennifer. Other council members? Well, I have one item I'd like to share. We had discussed over the last month having a fairly early council workshop in January. So we are looking at some dates toward the end of January. And I'm just simply tonight asking folks to take a look. We've traditionally done those either on a Friday, which at the end of January would be the 22nd or the 29th, or on a Saturday, which would be the 23rd or the 30th. I foresee that being about a 4-hour meeting. It would allow us to get a couple of our key topics done. Some items that we've been considering have been having our city attorney, Daniel, come back. He had done some training for us, but we ran out of time and didn't get to finish all of that training. And I think he would look forward to coming back and finishing that up and having a good discussion with the city council and with staff. Some of the other things that we have talked about, change in form of government. And I had mentioned doing a city council committees, but we really have that on tonight. I've talked to most of you about your interest in which committees you might want to be on. So we'll talk about that shortly. So anyway, we're just going to be working with all of you and our mayor and staff and trying to figure out what day works best. That would be a Zoom meeting. Some folks said that might work out better during the weekday, just because they have kids that are in school, and at least when they're in their meetings for school, it frees up a little time for parents. So anyway, we'll try to be as flexible as we can, work with everybody and find a date that we can all move forward on. With nothing else, I'd like to go ahead and move forward with our next item, which is our city council committee. We've currently have 2 committees, which are finance administration and public works. We are looking at establishing that they're actually already established in our council policies, but we would like to more formally set those up and assign folks to those. And those 2 new positions would be land use committee and a public works committee. Originally, I had suggested we wait till we get our new council member on board, but I think we have some important land use things to start. We wouldn't get a new council member in all practicality. They would be selected on the 19th, but they wouldn't show up till February. So it'd probably be mid-February, but I'd like to start sooner. I have talked to most of you and gotten feedback about what would work best. If I could have our city clerk, Jody, if you could pull up that chart and we can take a look. This is still flexible. It's council's decision. Some things have moved around a little bit. I did request about being on finance administration. I think it helps Mayor Pro Tem to be on administrative committee. And in my discussion with Councilmember Hoag, she had suggested she would be willing to have me take her spot on there. And Michelle looked at some other positions as well. Jody, does that want to pull up? If it doesn't want to work, I can talk.
I'm looking for it in my stuff, but I'm not seeing it for some reason. It's not coming up. Let me try one other thing.
No, that's okay. While you're working on that, I can actually talk through it as well. If I can find my paperwork here. One of the keys that I found is just simply to ask council members what positions they would like to have. So currently what I show is finance administration would be Councilmember Napland, Councilmember Langall, and myself. Public safety would remain with Councilmember McHenry and Councilmember Brudnicki. That would only have 2 assigned to it, although one of the considerations here would be, where do we put a new council member? So that's potential for a new council member. Land use, which is our new committee. Currently, I show that would be Councilmember Napland, Councilmember Langall, and there were 2 others that showed interest. One was Councilmember Brudnicki and Councilmember Hoag. Currently, I show Councilmember Hoag on there since she was giving up her original assignment. There we go.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. It looks like the computer in translation added some hieroglyphics on there, so I'm not
Oh,
sure.
that's because I have my paragraph marker on it. Sorry, I'm a clerk. That's just kind of the way it works with me.
Good. I didn't realize I could type in Egyptian or something there.
I'll take those off so you don't have to see them.
Well, thank you. So again, just going through that first column, we have Councilmember Naplin, Lingle, and myself. Public safety would be Councilmember McHenry and Brunicki, with a question mark on whether a new council member would be on there. Land use would be Councilmember Naplin, Lingle, and Councilmember Hoag or Brunicki. And then finally, Public Works would be Councilmember McHenry, potentially Councilmember Hoag, and myself, and potentially a new council member. So this is really open discussion. We can change this any way we like. If I got any of this wrong, do not hesitate to speak up and say, hey, I want a different assignment. Our goal here for our citizens that listen in is simply that council uses committees to have a closer interaction with city staff, to be able to hear about key topics ahead of time, to be able to provide some early input from council. We don't make decisions. We don't vote on our committees. They're not given responsibility away from the city council as a whole. And most items that are discussed at the committee level are brought before council for formal vote and decision making. So this is a tool that we use. There's pros and cons to those tools. I really appreciate our current committees, the hard work they've done, our city staff and the mayor over the last year, because we have kind of worked through some challenges, and I think we've refined some of that as well. So at the end of the day, I'm just hoping to hear from each person and make sure that if there's a change we need to make, that you just simply speak up so that we can make sure that we get this right. Once we do complete these assignments, it's up to the committees then to decide when they meet, working with city staff. You can set your own schedule. We do recommend that you, on our SharePoint site, set up a folder that can contain the information that's discussed, and that you select a chairperson. Yes, go ahead, Dana.
I think she was waving to somebody outside her window.
Oh, okay. That's so we do recommend you set up a folder to put things and then select a chair as well. And then you can set your schedule as you see fit. So I just wanted to touch basis and ask council members, do you see a change on here? Do you have a recommendation for one of our new positions? I think in my discussion with staff, I'll just add that we thought that finance administration and land use would probably be not something we would sign a new council member to, regardless of background early on, just because those take a fair amount of background and experience, and I think it might be a bit overwhelming initially, depending on who the new council member is. And so it made more sense to look at providing them an assignment for public safety or for public works. Not that those aren't critical and important as well, but I think it's easier for them to kind of learn and adapt on those committees. Certainly when we do get a new person on board, we'll simply ask them their interest, and we can certainly make adjustments at any time. So feedback from council members, is there a change any one of you would like to have? Councilmember Brunicki.
Yeah, so since I'm not on land use, would you like me to go to Public Works?
I'm more than happy to do that. The way the math works out here, there's a maximum of 3 council members per committee, and there's 4 committees. That's 12 positions. There's 7 of us. And so if you do the math, if we all had 2, that'd be 14. So we don't even have enough space for everybody to have 2. And so a couple of council members, I suggest that we only make one assignment for our new council member. But the rest is up to us. So Councilmember Brunicki, if you would like to be on Public Works, I'm happy to add you there. And we could take off the new council member from there. Is that what you would like to do?
Yeah, and I was wondering when we get a new council member, maybe if they're really interested, mid-year, can you change out? If
Yeah,
they
if we
really
could
want,
actually do that at any point, and I think that makes sense. I do see that there's various backgrounds with uh, our applicants, and we may very well see that somebody has a background that would fit one versus another, but we can just have that discussion. So this isn't, while we're finalizing it tonight to a degree, we certainly can open it up anytime.
because I would be flexible if the new person who comes on really wants to be on that committee. I can easily get off and they can take my place.
Great. Let's go ahead, Jody, and include Councilmember Brunicki on the Public Works, please. Thank you. By the way, there's other committees that had been suggested. These are formal committees established by City Council. These are actually already listed in our council plan, if you will. But it doesn't mean we can't have other committees. Some have suggested that we do something with economic development in the past. There's also been a discussion about having a communication outreach for citizens. We've had a lot going on with facilities and discussions about whether someday we might have a new city hall. So that could easily be another committee or ad hoc committee that we develop that relate to facilities as well. So while we're expanding the committees we have, this doesn't mean that we, as we move forward during the year, have a special need. The mayor also has the power to say, hey, we need some special input and establish certain types of committees that can help advise administration as well. So I think we can just work together and as we look at our needs and start to expand. So with that, other input, changes? City Clerk Wyckoff.
We currently have an ad hoc committee made up of Councilmember McHenry because former Councilmember Iyer was the other person for the ad hoc committee for the Human Services Grant Policy. Due to COVID and everybody's crazy schedules, we were never able to touch base and really iron out a new policy. So wondering if Ms. McHenry wants to continue that and if anybody else wants to join in on the fun, because I think we should probably take a look at that before we start the process for 2021.
Thank you. So I think the question on the floor is simply, would someone else like to join that ad hoc committee to provide assistance?
And is Ms. McHenry still willing to serve?
Well, she doesn't have a choice.
No, okay.
I'm muted. Hold on. No, I would be happy to. It would kind of, I'd like to see that get completed and help see that through since I've been through a round of that. And I think I still remember, I think I have notes somewhere about how we could fine tune that. And so, yeah, hopefully someone else could jump on with me though, so that it's not just me and staff.
Yeah. Councilmember Hoag.
I'd be interested in doing that ad hoc committee with you, Councilmember McHenry.
That's awesome.
Great, thank you. Anyone else would like to join that committee? So it looks like we have two assigned there. If there's no additional input on our city council assignments that we have, or additional committees right now, I think that we're probably done, but I'll ask one more time. Any thoughts, concerns, ideas on where the new person ought to go or leave them off a committee for a while? Not seeing any input. I think we're done with this topic and we can move on. Again, I just want to recognize those who've been on committees. It's a lot of extra work, but I think well worth the time and energy to help work with the city more closely and advance items. Well, our second item tonight is sewer rates, general facilities charge, Director Laniszewski. And I believe you have a guest. If you could introduce him this evening.
You bet. We have a few guests. So Steve
Yeah.
Laniszewski, Public Works. Hello, Mayor, Council, and citizens. I'm not sure if we have anybody on the line here as participants, but yeah, there's a few. There you go. We today have Parametrics, also Financial Consultant Services Group, FCSG, they go by as their acronym. We have John Ghirlandaducci and Tagi Aker from their office, who facilitate a lot of rates for a lot of people in the area. So we're in great hands. I think Tagi will give most of the presentation here, but John may say a little bit. Randy's here as well in the sunshiny, maybe upland desert. I'm not sure where he is, but he looks like he's happy getting his UV, so vitamin D. So with that said, we're gonna go right into the presentation. We talked last week about the CIP portion of the sewer capital improvement program. So in conjunction with studying that, our budget as proposed, and then looking at the operational work that we've done also with Parametrics, the FCS group has helped us understand our finances, for the immediate and short-term future, and trying to help us prescribe what our rates should be, and advising us also what our general facilities connection charges should be. So with that said, we'll do a presentation, and then we have, this is workshops, so we have plenty of time for Q&A, and I think we're in good hands here with our consultant group. So I will turn it over to Mr. Tagi, and he'll start us off, or John, I'm not sure how they are.
Thanks, Steve. I'll actually lead us off. I'm the principal on the project. Tagi's the project manager. He'll take us through really the meat of the rate results. I'll kind of tee it up with some introductory and background information, and then I'll come back and talk about the capital facilities charge recommendations a little later too. So you could hit the next slide, Tagi. So I mentioned we'll lead off with some introduction and background, and then Tagi will talk about the fiscal policy recommendations, summarize the capital program and the capital funding strategy, which really gets down to what rates and charges need to be to execute the recommendations of the system plan, the master plan. So, and then he'll go through the rate forecast, and I'll come back and talk about the general facilities charges. We've got some survey information to share with you as well. So our by way of background and introduction, our most key result is right in the middle of this slide, and that's the revenue requirement. The revenue requirement is the determination of how much money we need from rates in order to meet all the financial obligations of the sewer utility. So in order to get to that number, we need to resolve what our policy objectives are going to be, like target reserve levels, what kind of cushions we need, financial cushions we need in order to ensure the fiscal health of the utility. We need the operating budget, and we forecast those expenses into the future. We need the capital plan in order to know what capital costs there are going to be. And so those are the three main inputs to determine that revenue requirement. The GFCs, which are one-time fees paid by new development at the time of development, they help pick up some of the capital project costs. So they relieve the burden on ratepayers and reduce the rate revenue requirement. So that's why you see that arrow coming in from the GFCs. And then the final step of our work is interacting with you, the council, and documenting our work in a report or a chapter of the master plan. So we know quite a bit about the sewer utility, thanks to staff and the documentation you have in Parametrics work. 30 miles of collection system, 6 lift stations, and of course, the wastewater treatment plant. Because Duval is primarily residential, most of the rates come from residential customers, about 4% from commercial customers. The capacity of the treatment plant and thereby the system is 1.3 million gallons a day with the existing 3 trains. Future expansion will take it to 1.75 million gallons a day. That's plenty of capacity. I know Duval is growing robustly, but just so you know, current flows right now in the winter, which is peak for sewer, 0.75 million gallons a day. So still capacity there in the treatment facility. That's good because there's a little bit of room there for growth to occur before that next expansion. Growth pays those GFCs, general facilities charges, to buy into that existing capacity and help repay the ratepayers who've built it for them. So a peek at the existing sewer rates. One of the reasons, and you'll see this as Tagi goes through the revenue requirement results, one of the reasons the city is in good shape comparatively with its rates is because past councils stepped up and adopted the rates that were needed and the GFCs to fund major improvements like the treatment plant expansion that happened, oh gosh, now probably 15 plus years ago. But the existing rates here in 2020, $77.86 a month per single family residence. Commercial customers pay that same monthly fixed rate plus $2.83 per 100 cubic feet of metered water use over 900 cubic feet. So once they hit 900 cubic feet, they pay $2.83 per 100 of water use after that. The GFCs also shown here in 2020, that GFC is $11,754 per equivalent residence. So newly developing commercial customers will pay that fee times the number of equivalent residences that they are based on their forecasted usage. So this is a snapshot of the financial plan, or excuse me, financial status of the sewer utility. You see on the left, revenues, primarily coming from rates and charges. That's the big sort of slate colored section of the pie. And then sewer GFCs at about $500,000 a year. Those can only be used to pay for capital. You see about $2.5 million in sewer rates. On the right, total expenses, operating expenses, almost $2 million exceeded by sewer rates, capital of a little less than 500,000, and debt service are the main expenditures for the sewer utility. So you see, I mean, revenues are exceeding expenditures right now, which is a good thing. We have to look forward at the recommendations of the master plan in order to see what rate adjustments might be necessary.
All right, thank you, John. So the next section, we'll be talking about the revenue requirement. And a little bit of a background on that. Utility rates are set to recover the cost of providing service. Those are our two main types of costs that we look at, as John mentioned in some of those introductory slides. You have those operating costs, and second, you have the capital costs. Those operating costs are typically a little bit more predictable year to year. Those are your employee salaries and benefits, routine repair and maintenance. You have power costs, utilities, cost of chemicals to treat wastewater, monthly bill processing. And then on the capital side, depending on what types of projects and how many projects the city will be undertaking in a particular year, the spending on the capital program can be lower or higher in any given year. And we'll get into what that plan is in just a few slides. So how much revenue does the utility need? It's a function of quite a few different things. John mentioned fiscal policies. Of course, we take the current operating and maintenance costs of the utility, forecast that out on an annual basis. And then the next two components towards the bottom are rate funded capital. That's annual revenues set aside for funding capital projects with cash, and then covering not only existing debt service on previous loans that are currently being paid for, But in the event that there may be some borrowing to fund part of the upcoming capital program, you got to make sure that there's revenues in place to pay for that new principal and interest payments on new debt. And all that combined totals your annual revenue needs of the utility. So first up, we wanted to touch briefly on fiscal policies. Currently, the city has a $1 million reserve policy in place for the wastewater utility. Could be used for operating or capital contingencies. We've worked with staff to sort of break that into more granular components, one for operating and two for capital. So for the operating reserve, this is essentially working capital, helps the utility meet its day-to-day operations while revenues come in. Sometimes there's a little bit of a gap there between when you have to pay your bills and when revenue comes in. So that helps bridge that gap there. Typically, the reserve is based on a number of days of expenses. We're recommending 45 to 60 days of expenses based on the current budget. That's $250,000 to $350,000. Separate from that, we have the capital reserve here on the bottom. This is a reserve in place to handle any sort of unexpected issues with capital projects. You may have emergency repairs that might be needed or project cost overruns on planned capital projects. And we're recommending that amount be linked to a percentage of the current amount of assets that the utility has, 1% to 2% of that total. So that's a range of $300,000 to $600,000. So if you add those two together, that's about $950,000, $350,000 for operating and $600,000 for the capital reserve. There we go. Sewer operating fund, that's Fund 402. Healthy as of the beginning of the year 2020, it had $2.5 million. Remember, the reserve target was about $350,000. So anything above that line here at the bottom, we're assuming could be used for planned future capital projects. The sewer capital fund, target reserve of about $600,000. At the beginning of 2020 had about $750,000. So again, meeting that minimum reserve target. And we've worked with city staff and the consulting engineer, parametrics, to put together a sewer CIP and capital funding strategy. So what you see here in these bars are planned capital projects for the sewer utility. And you can see there's a couple of years that are in the $1 to $2 million range. 2024 is particularly large. There's one large project, the wastewater treatment plant capacity upgrade phase 2. That's about $7.3 million. And there's a couple of other projects sprinkled in that year as well. And then after that, there's some citywide programs you see in these yellow gold bars. So some higher years, one big year, and then the out years levelizes to about $500,000 or $600,000 per year. So in order to fund that $18.3 million of capital projects, we've put together a capital funding strategy spanning through 2030. So over half of it is expected to be funded in this dark gray color through GFCs. This is fees paid by development as it connects to the system. Roughly 25% we're projecting to be funded with rates, annual set-asides from rate revenue, specifically for capital projects. And we're estimating that roughly 20% of the CIP would be funded with the debt. And the reason for that is, if you remember on this slide, there's a pretty big capital project here in 2024. And only relying on reserves and GFCs, you can't quite swing it with that timing. So we're recommending, if you want to complete the CIP as laid out by the engineering department and consulting engineer, there might need to be some borrowing. Wanted to dig a little bit into the GFCs. In the dark bars here, you have actual GFC revenue by year. It's been pretty healthy the past several years. In fact, in 2020, about $1.2 million was received in GFC revenues. There are some ups and downs. 2013 was a little over $400,000. 2015 was pretty minimal. So these can be volatile depending on what developments are coming online, but wanted to point out what that has been in the past 10 years or so. Going forward for the next 5 or 6 years, based on developments that staff have identified as likely to be coming online, we're projecting about 100 units per year over the next 5 years, which supports GFC revenue of over $1 million per year. And that goes a long ways towards funding that CIP. In those out years, we're assuming about 30 units per year, trying to be conservative in our estimates. If growth ends up being a little bit more robust in those out years, that would give you a little bit more GFC revenue to put towards the capital program. So moving on to the revenue requirement forecast, what needs to happen to rates in order to fund not only your operating expenses, but your existing and new debt service, as well as rate funded capital. So there's a lot going on here, so I wanted to walk you through this graphic. The stacked bars you see going from left to right are the financial obligations of the utility. And then we forecast that going forward for a 10-year study period, going from 2020 here all the way to 2030. So in the dark blue color here, that's your operating and maintenance expenses based on your current biennium budget in 21 and 22. On top of that, you see your existing debt service in purple. That's for your current wastewater treatment plant loan that's projected to be fully paid off by 2025. And on top of that, you see with that borrowing we're projecting for 2024, you do take on some new debt service obligations going forward. But one good thing about that is you're spreading that cost over a 20-year period. So not only are existing customers paying rates to support debt service, but as growth occurs and new connections hook up to the system, those new customers will be helping pay for that expansion over time as well through rates. And on top of that, you have your gold bars here. That's the amount of rates set aside for rate-funded capital. So again, these stacked bars are the financial obligations of the utility. And then you have these lines. The dark solid line on the bottom here is your revenue at current rates. The reason it's going up year to year is because we're projecting those 100 units per year as they connect to the system begin paying your monthly rates. And that adds some revenue to the system before any rate increases are applied. And it levels out in those out years as we're conservatively projecting growth for that period. The dashed line shows what we expect rate revenue to be with the annual rate adjustments. So in 2021, there was a 0.9% rate increase per city policy inflation-based adjustment. Going forward, we're projecting that 2.5% would be needed each year in order to sustainably fund the sewer utility. So with your current, 2020, your current rate was $77.86 per single family customer per month. With that 0.9% rate increase, that bill bumped up to just under $79 per month. And going forward with 2.5% rate increases, you can see that bill go up to $80.52, $82.54, et cetera, increasing at about $2 per year. So that 2.5% annual rate adjustment equates to about $2 increase to the monthly charge. This slide shows funds 402, 408. This is the combined operating and capital snapshot. It shows the ending balance at the end of each year. Fairly steady for these first few years, drawn down a little bit to help fund that large capital project in 2024, and then slowly gets built back up as the original wastewater treatment plant loan is paid off in 2025, and you might recall that capital spending on average is a little bit less per year in those out years towards the end of the forecast. So this will allow the utility to have a cushion there to fund future capital projects and be able to fund more of that with cash. We did put together a rate survey based on rates at the time. So Duval here on the left, 2020 rate was 77.86. With that 0.9% rate increase, 78.56 per month. We included the cities of Snoqualmie, Sultan, Snohomish, Monroe, North Bend, and Carnation in this comparison. And so Duval is on the lower end of this comparison group. Just wanted to point that out there. And the last slide in the revenue requirement section is the monthly sewer rate forecast. If the rates were to increase at the recommended amount of 2.5% per year through 2030, you can see how that would impact the single family bill, as we touched on when we looked at that graphic a couple of slides ago. The commercial charges would also increase so that the same fixed charge would apply in any given year for residential and commercial. They both go up by the same percentage. And that 2.5% also would apply to the volume charge. You can see here that increasing over time as well. So all of your existing stated rates would increase by the same percentage at 2.5% per year. And that's the last slide on revenue requirements. And next up is John's going to talk about the GFCs.
Thanks, Tagi. So a quick refresher on what GFCs are. These are the one-time charges paid at the time of development by new development. So this is the mechanism that the RCW gives us to make growth pay for growth, basically, with utilities. They include a buy-in to existing infrastructure and also a component that's based on planned future facilities that will serve growth. As I mentioned there at the bottom of the slide, properties which are already developed don't pay a GFC unless they redevelop into something bigger that's going to demand more of the sewer system. They are for general facilities, not the local connection. This is for a share of the treatment plant, expansion. And they're for capital only. We can't use these revenues for operations, and we calculate them based on the cost of capital, assets already constructed and planned capital. So what do GFCs do? They, as I mentioned, recover the cost of growth from growth, at least partially. In so doing, they help reimburse the ratepayers who've already invested in facilities that are big enough to serve growth. And they did that with their rate dollars. So it relieves their burden going forward. It provides revenue for capital, construction, and debt service. We still have to set rates to meet debt service payments, but you can use GFCs to pay debt service. And recovering costs equitably has to do with intergenerational equity, the equity between current users and future users. The idea being if we didn't have these, it would be all on your existing ratepayers to build the capacity that's needed for growth. And instead, we use these to equalize that. The existing sewer GFC, as I mentioned, $11,754 per ERU. Our calculation framework is shown here. We're going to take the cost of both existing and future facilities that will serve everyone, that being the existing customers plus growth, and divide that by the total projected capacity at build out after the next treatment plant expansion. And that's going to be one component of the GFC. The second component, there are a number of planned capital projects for which there's an identifiable piece that will only serve growth. So we're going to take that piece and those projects and divide that by growth only. That will be the second piece. And the one thing that I guess the third piece, which we're not going to include, is the cost of just repairing and replacing the system that's already there. So unless there are projects that are expanding capacity and will serve growth, possibly in addition to existing customers, if those projects are not doing that, if they're simply replacement projects, we're not going to include them. So here's the math. That first component, that calculation is shown here. Utility plant and service is the cost of existing sewer assets. That totals 28.8 million, as you see there. We're going to take out everything that's been contributed by developers, by grants, because we're not going to ask new development to buy into a share of assets that were free to the ratepayers. So we take out those contributions. The law allows us to recover interest up to 10 years from the time of construction. So we add that back in to the plant and service, the non-contributed plant. And then we're adding in the cost of future facilities that will serve growth and existing customers proportionally. That's the 3.58 million, and construction work in progress, construction that's being done right now. So that total, $19.7 million, we're going to divide by the total system capacity at build out, which you see in the second table here. Quote unquote build out with the fourth train, the future treatment plant expansion included, should be about 12,000 people. That's equivalent to 3,928 equivalent residential units. So that will be our denominator in that calculation. The second GFC component summarized here. The capital plan, $15.7 million. That's without including inflation. That's why it doesn't foot to the number you saw in the rate summary. We're going to take out everything that's not capacity related and all the repair and replacement projects. So this is growth only capital, and divide that by projected growth in ERUs from now to that same projected build out. That's 994 ERUs. And that's going to be our denominator in that calculation. So you see the result of both components on this next page. On the left, the first component, 19.7 million, divided by total capacity at build out, 3,928 ERUs, a little over $5,000 per ERU. And on the right side, growth only facilities. These are different projects from the ones on the left. Divided by growth only gives us a result of 9,836 for a total GFC, maximum defensible GFC, $14,846 per ERU. So compared to the existing GFC of 11,754, that's an increase of a little over $3,000 to that calculated maximum. And then we've got some comparables on this page. That Carnation number, as you see in the note, includes the charge that goes to King County for the King County treatment plant in Carnation. So their total local plus that charge is a little over $20,000. You see North Bend at $15,290, and Snoqualmie, Sultan, Monroe, and Snohomish also included here, and where the city would fit into that with the newly calculated fee. So in conclusion, hearkening back to the work that Tagi walked us through, our recommendations are to adopt the 2.5% rate increase, annual rate increases beginning in 2022 to cover operating expense inflation, cash fund some capital, and pay new debt service needed to fund capital projects. The GFC, again, the maximum defensible and recommended GFC, 14,846 per ERU. As the city has been doing, we would recommend that you index that with inflation every year, and thereby protecting the ratepayers from growth impacts. The one thing that it is important to mention, this is a calculated maximum, so the council's under no obligation to adopt the full cost number. They could pick a number less than that or phase to this number over a couple of years. They just can't exceed the calculated maximum. And that's what we've got.
Well, thank you for the presentation. I see some hands up. Councilmember Naplin, question?
Yeah, thanks. That was a great presentation. There was a slide that showed the projected fund balance based on the projected rates. Is there any way you could put that one back up there? There we go. So I'm looking at the balances growing quite a bit after 2024. And so I'm curious what made you determine that the 2.5 per year increase was necessary? You know, potentially, I mean, there was a loan as part of that. And so I'm just thinking maybe if the loan was a little higher, then, you know what I mean, it would be offset and you could have the later balances not grow so much because you would be paying back that loan instead of allowing your balances to grow so far beyond minimum requirement.
Yeah, I've got a couple of things. Yeah, one is there is that pinch here. I'll go a couple of slides earlier in 2024.
Right.
And I can't speak to if that could be pushed to a few years later. I know we've got somebody on the line here that has put together that CIP, but that is the pinch here in the forecast in terms of, you know, we've got to fund that project in that year. Unfortunately, the balances aren't quite there to cash fund that if it were to be pushed later. Again, I don't know if that's possible from a regulatory perspective, but and the other piece there is there's some robust growth that's projected and incorporated into the numbers that we've put forth here. So if for some reason growth were to come to a halt or even be even half of what was projected in those next 5 years, there could be some issues there. Mm-hmm. I'll point out the graphic here. You know, we're projecting, you know, based on real developments, that there will be, you know, $5 or $6 million of GFCs in the next 5 years. And if for some reason that's $3 or $4 million, we wanted to build in a little bit of a buffer there to make sure that you're not running out of money there towards the end of the forecast. And I think Steve's mentioned at least once or twice that, you know, we're not asking you to adopt 10 years of rate increases, right, but it's you know, every year or two, you kind of look under the hood to make sure things are working as we thought. And if growth is stronger or slower than we projected, then, you know, there's time to readjust there. So you're in a good position. You've been increasing rates slowly based on inflationary adjustments every year. So that's why we put together that plan.
Yeah, a lot of residents were under the impression when the sewer fees first came in, and that were much higher than what had been previously, that there would be significant relief at the point that you know, the new growth came in, that there would be a very large relief. And, you know, continuing to see rates march forward at, you know, what appears to be likely beyond even inflation, you know, it's a little bit disappointing as someone who remembers that being shared with the community. So I would have liked to see a little bit of relief in the rate amount. And I know there's some comparison to some of the other cities, but some of those other cities, I think, recently had to do some upgrades. And, you know, if you compare, I think, to maybe a city like Redmond or some of those others, I think our utilities might be a little on the higher side, but I'd have to look closer at that. So anyway, just trying to share what I recall as a ratepayer here for 20 years.
Well, and I was involved in that study, so I know exactly what you're talking about. One thing that that comes up again and again is, you know, the costs against the size of the customer base just makes it really difficult to get to keep the rates as low as we would like them. A city like Redmond has such, they've just got a much larger customer base to spread those costs, and a certain amount of these costs associated with a treatment plant expansion, they don't scale with the size. You know, some of them are just fixed, and they don't necessarily scale with the size of the community. So that's that in a nutshell. That's why, you know, easy for us to say that the picture doesn't look, the forecast doesn't look that bad to us, because we've seen so much worse for cities of Duval's size that haven't planned well and look to the future as well as the city has. For what that's worth, I know we don't have to pay the rates, but
yeah, I just feel like I've been paying a really high utility bill for a long time. 20 years ago, I think I've got garbage, sewer, water, all in one bill, like $100 every other month or some ridiculously low number. I could be remembering wrong, but I just do recall it being under the impression that there would be significant relief once the growth came to fruition. And this doesn't look like relief. So anyway, thank you.
Councilmember Langle.
Yeah, I'd like to go back to the slide where we talked about capacity in terms of the unit counts. And the one, I'm hoping I tracked this well enough when you were going through it. Yeah, we're hitting it right there. So if I'm reading this correctly, if we build a fourth tran, our growth capacity for that fourth is 994 units. Am I understanding the chart correctly?
essentially.
I only need in shooting distance because I'm a back of the napkin. I let Steve figure out I'm just trying to make sure I'm understanding it. 994 units additionally.
Of equivalent residential units.
Right.
Yes, not people. Yeah.
No. You've got the population number on a different slide.
Right.
And you're using 3 people per unit.
Right.
And that's what's generating the expected impacts. So then to the others, so I did write that down, right? I even wrote the right number down. I was writing as fast as I could. So then the other question, I'm just going through this logic here. The growth that you projected for those subsequent years, and maybe this is a question for Steve or Laura, but you probably know the answer as well. You're talking about only units in our existing pipeline. You are not talking about us bringing in more land into the city. You're talking about land that's built in the city. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
And then the 5-year forecast, we worked really hard to correlate it to everything we have on the books and not try to surmise and guess, but it was very, very much as fact-based as we could with what's in plat phase and or construction phase.
That's excellent. That's exactly what I wanted to hear, quite frankly. And so this is very timely, and I am like super excited about this because I'm an asset management kind of person. And so what I get out of this then is, given our existing ERUs, which you've got at 2865, and our capacity with the fourth, with the capital improvement, that means that we've only got the 994, which means at the fourth, we are built out entirely with what's in our pipeline. I think I got that right. So somebody tell me if my little summary there is not right, but I think that's what you just told me.
I would, before I say yes, I think Randy could probably confirm and clarify that a little more in detail, because it is kind of, everybody has the, you know, the system capacity and then our growth capacity, and they usually are hand in hand. But yeah, let me put Randy on the spot.
Yeah, so that's essentially correct based on the city's current planning assumptions that, you know, we use things that are consistent with other elements of the comprehensive planning. And that, I don't believe that includes any UGA additions or anything, but for the current, you know, the existing UGA, and that gets you essentially to your build out population. And that fourth train at the treatment plant should provide adequate capacity, both hydraulically and from a treatment perspective, to treat that build out population.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really timely discussion because the county is, you know, talking to us about, you know, job growth that I think is unlikely given our limited commercial property. And then also the factor they're using for number of people for units is less, which makes no sense given Duval census data and so forth and what you're projecting. So this is perfect timing because if we're not including urban growth areas, and I guess you need to double check that, then that means if we do this, we are serving the citizens of Duval and growth in Duval. And, you know, some portion of that is now going to be paid for by the developers that build in Duval, but not urban growth areas. So if I'm getting it right, that's where we are. We're built out because we can't have more than a fourth. You can't put in a fifth. Is that right? I thought that's what I heard from Randy last presentation.
So again, I believe the fourth, and I have to go back and we did a capacity analysis, and I don't have that right in front of me, but I can look at it here in a minute. I believe that is your build out capacity, certainly to the existing UGA, and you have a couple of potential UGA expansions that were identified in your comprehensive planning. And that's what I'd have to check as to whether or not that is included. But I believe that gets us all the way to any UGA that's identified current or future. I just need to double check and make sure that's correct.
Yeah, that's a really critical question for us right now.
Okay.
Because unfortunately, our topography doesn't let us do other things that all feed into that. So the sewer piece is extremely important for us to know the exact thing. And frankly, we need to know it sooner than later because, as I'm sure Laura and Steve know, the county is moving extraordinarily fast with new growth targets. So we really need to know that. Like, you don't have to look it up now, but can I know? Can I know like next week or something as soon as possible?
Yeah, absolutely. We can do that.
I mean, this is awesome. I love it. Thanks, Steve.
Additional questions from council members? I don't see any. I've got a couple myself. We had mentioned, you know, if you want growth to pay for growth, you know, we work with that GFC or the impact fee charge. But I see we do have future debt capacity to help pay for some of the addition of that last train that we have. At least that's the way it appeared. Is there a reason we wouldn't want GFC to pay for all of that and eliminate the debt?
It has to do with timing. GFCs, just by their nature, are a cash flow problem. You know, you expect that growth to occur over many years, and so the revenue comes in over many years. If you need the facilities sooner, you essentially have to issue debt in order to get them built. And then as the GFCs come in, you can use them to pay the debt service or to cash fund future capital. And that's how indirectly the ratepayers are reimbursed. It's not a direct payment. They sort of have to front the money through the debt issue, they being the ratepayers, to be repaid by the GFCs over time because of that timing issue.
Well, thank you, John. I see that you had also included the interest in things in one of your calculations there, so that makes sense. I noticed that, you know, this doesn't really plan for replacement of large portions of the facility. I don't think we're looking at doing that anytime soon, but at some point, at some future place, someone's going to have to replace parts of that plant, and it'll be the ratepayers paying for it. I get that we don't want to have millions of dollars just of ratepayer money sitting in the bank until that occurs, but at some point you have to say, boy, this facility's getting pretty old and we need to make, you know, that investment. How does a city plan for that huge replacement of infrastructure? So if we just said the cement's deteriorating, you know, I'm not talking an earthquake, but just normal wear and tear, and now we have to replace a certain portion of our waste treatment plant, how do we plan for that type of replacement in the future?
And I don't know, Tog, you want me to take a shot at this, and you can add to it as needed?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. So first of all, there are some replacement projects in the capital plan, and Randy can probably speak to that. You see there are some main replacements. So we can't include them in the general facilities charge, but they are included as part of the rate needs in the revenue requirements. So the rates are set to meet those replacement needs. As far as what else might be needed in the way of replacement, you know, that's talking about asset management. That's, you know, that's one way to really do a detailed look at the condition of all parts of the system and plan out how you're going to replace that over time. There are some industry standard approaches, like setting rates to cover depreciation as if it were a cash expense and spending that money on replacement. The city looks to be going forward, and you saw those accumulating fund balances, to be in pretty good shape. That money could be used on replacement. That money could be used to meet whatever future capital needs there are, but that would be a potential use of those fund balances. So I hope that answers your question. It's a tough one that everyone is grappling with to fully fund replacement.
Yeah, I know there's not a simple answer for that, but that did really help. I appreciate it. My last question, and this is maybe outside the box. So a lot of the areas around us don't have their own waste treatment plant. They simply connect to Metro, and they pay a fee for that. In Duval's case, we had septic systems, then we moved to our own waste treatment. We're isolated out here. We're not contiguous to other cities. It made sense. But at some point, not too far across the valley, will be a pipe and an opportunity to potentially put in a pump station and connect Duval to that versus having our own system. I have no clue what the costs are. I'm not even suggesting we consider it, but I always try to say, what's the long game? And there are cities that say, we no longer need to have our own. We can connect to Metro. It makes sense financially. The closest one we have is miles away. So there's, you know, the cost is probably prohibitive for us to consider. But, you know, what metrics do we as a city use to try to determine someday that we no longer need to manage our own plant, but we can connect to the larger county system and make it more affordable?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that one, except you'd want to do a very careful benefit cost analysis to compare compare those options if it became a real option. I don't know, Randy or Steve, if you have anything better to add to that.
It's long range and big picture thinking, so I really don't.
Yeah.
Our
I don't
wire probably has significant capacity, but it's
Getting it there.
interesting topic.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to throw it out. I have been asked about that in the past. I don't want to mislead any of our citizens. We have an outstanding system of our own here. It was well planned. I think your calculations show that it's being well run. We certainly have challenges. We have to look at additional expense for adding capacity and so on. I think overall our citizens are very pleased with the system that we have in place. So I'm in no way trying to infer that there's a problem and we need to look for options. But I like to look down the road 20 or 30 years, because 20, 30 years goes by in 20 or 30 years and you're on top of it. And so anyway, when we have your expertise here, it's nice to be able to at least discuss those, even though it's a hypothetical. Very nice presentation. I appreciate it. If we have the opportunity to post this so our citizens can have the actual presentation online, I know that'd be appreciated. Councilmember Naplin.
I have another. Could you go back to what our current capacity is and what the current usage is? I think it was on one of the first pages.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it was in that introductory.
Yeah.
Scroll up there. Just give me a moment. Here we go.
So when I look at the capacity being 1.3, that is the maximum. And so you really have to bring it back down to 85% to talk about what our real capacity is. Is that correct? Because you aren't allowed, you shouldn't be operating on the 85.
And yeah, go ahead, Randy, sorry.
That's correct. So the Department of Ecology requires that when you reach 85% of your plant capacity, and that's either your hydraulic capacity or your treatment capacity, then you need to begin planning for your next treatment plant upgrade. And the reason you aren't just adding 25% capacity, that number is based, the numbers that we see on this slide are based on your hydraulic capacity, and it's actually your treatment capacity that is governing your particular system. So you're getting very close to that 85% number. You know, we predict that that will happen here in the next 2 to 3 years based on the treatment rather than so the hydraulic capacity is how much water you can physically move through the plant. The treatment capacity is how much biology and total suspended solids can you remove from the plant, and they typically aren't the same. So you're bumping up against your treatment capacity, and that's what is driving us to need to add that fourth treatment train here within the next few years. And Tagi mentioned when he was responding to your earlier question about the possibility of moving that plant expansion out a few years, and I don't think you can depend on that right now. You're coming up against that number pretty quick. Your community is growing very rapidly. We're adding demand to that system every day. So it may be out there a year or two more than what we predicted, but I don't believe it would be much more than that.
So you're saying that because if I take 1.3 as our current capacity, multiply it by 85%, I've got 1.1. Compare 1.1 to the 0.75 winter usage, I've got almost 50% excess capacity before I even hit an 85%. So for me, I'm just like kind of mind blown why we would be talking about a new train when it appears that even before I have almost 50% growth in my community before I even hit the 85%. So I really would love to see, when you're talking about the true capacity limitations and our current usage, I think those numbers would be really important to me to understand where we're at, because it sounds like these are almost irrelevant when we're
sorry.
talking about capacity.
It
And
looks better than it is. Sorry.
yeah, exactly. And which is interesting because I had a conversation before I was on council and had been reassured again and again that we had plenty of capacity even to annex and build out the entire annexation before we even need to worry about it. And I'm wondering if they use similar calculations to where I'm looking at the 1.3 and, you know, those kind of things. But the other thing I'm thinking is the winter is much, much higher than the summer. And so obviously people aren't adding much more solids in the winter than the summer. So I'm just trying to sort out, obviously, that I&I type situation. Can we improve that significantly, hopefully, and buy ourselves more time? And what would that look like? I'd like to see that.
Right, sure. And so again, to the disparity between that winter flow and the capacity, again, is kind of the difference between your hydraulic capacity and your treatment capacity, to answer that question. And then yes, the difference between winter and summer is the I&I. And as we discussed at the last meeting, we do have some projects lined up to try and correct that. The reality is you may be able to, with the continued I&I improvements, you may be able to push out when you hit that 85% threshold. But after doing this for 25 years, it's been pretty rare to see that happen fast enough. Just it takes a lot of work to correct that I&I, and you don't always make the gains you hope to with an I&I reduction program. So that's why, and Steve can speak to that as well, that's why we are pursuing those projects and why staff wants to do those projects. But you can't say with certainty, hey, if I do this project, I am absolutely certain to remove this amount of I&I and that will buy me this much more capacity. Unfortunately, you can't predict it that solidly.
Yeah, and it's not just I&I.
I'd really like to see the actual current usage and the current capacity in real numbers that I can grab a hold of, because I want to know exactly how many more units could we take on with the current third train only.
Right.
And I at this point, I can't really determine that.
Right, and like I said, that's not just hydraulic capacity, it's also, the BOD, the biological component of the system, which isn't recognized on this table. So that's
exactly.
a little
Yeah.
bit.
So how many more units can we add before we hit 85%? Because according to the numbers presented here, it looks like I've got a lot of units left, but I clearly don't.
Yeah, you can dig that memo up that Randy generated a while back, and then just double check that it has all the information that we're currently looking for, making sure it's the same.
Yeah, so we did that analysis in late 2018 and did it based on the hydraulic and the treatment. And so that's the memo that Steve's speaking to. So we can certainly pull that out. And that breaks it down a little more accurately. And again, I apologize for having stared at these numbers for a long time. I didn't, as John said, these are numbers that we've looked at quite a bit, and that's a very good point that you bring up, that there's clearly a discrepancy there.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
And before we leave the topic too, I did go back and look to answer Councilmember Lengel's earlier question, so that the 4 train capacity does serve your full build out, including all currently identified potential UGA expansions. So everything on your your current planning zoning map, including the I believe there are some reserve UGA areas there, that will cover all of that.
Randy, Mike Remington, just to confirm, if we as a council were to modify our zoning map to include a higher number of units. That changes this calculation as well.
Correct. And they're looking at the numbers, the fourth train should provide capacity actually in excess of that full build out to the current planning. So depending on how much you modified that, we made certain land use assumptions based on current zoning or anticipated zoning of UGA expansion. If you increase the density in those areas, you would probably still have capacity. There is a bit of a surplus there still. So, but of course, if you made it to a much higher density, if you made it multifamily where it's currently, 4 single family per residence or something like that, you could probably exceed that capacity. But if you went from 4 residential units per acre to 6 or something like that, you would probably be okay.
Well, thank you for both the presentation, your hard work putting this study together. This is critical for us as a city and as a council administration to be able to look at the information, the data, and be able to make our decisions moving forward. I'm real pleased to see that our plant overall is doing well, but we certainly have challenges coming up and need to make some decisions. And thanks for your input on the rates as well. We realize those are something that is an option for us, so we can take a look and see what our capacity is for trying to keep rates at a place where we won't fall behind. If no other questions, we thank you again for the presentation. Steve, our next item is request for proposals. We're down to 8 minutes. I'd like to go ahead and move that to City Council meeting, Mayor, if that works for you. That allows us to take a few minutes break here before we walk into our next meeting. Okay, the Mayor says yes. And with that, this meeting is adjourned and we will see you at City Council at 7 o'clock. Thank you, everyone.